Hi there, you are listening to the Guitar Speak podcast, produced in Sydney and beamed all around the world via the interwebs, the internet, you know. Hey, my name's Matt Wakeling. Thank you so much for joining me. Today, Randall Waller is our featured guest. Had a great talk with Randall. Randall is a bona fide rock star, and you'll find out why very shortly. But first, I need to let you know today's episode is brought to you by yougroove. Yougroove are the cool people who redesigned our Guitar Speak podcast logo. Thank you guys. Thank you. Warren Scott. He's a designer and he's a killer drummer, so you can book him for a gig or you can get him to design stuff for you. Or like I've done, you can do both. You can get to him at yougroove at optusnet.com.au. We're also brought to you by the Michael Dolce 2016 Funk Fusion Masterclass. And if you've been listening for a while, you'll know I got to one of these classes in, a couple of months ago. It was brilliant. Here's Michael to tell us a little bit about what happens at one of these classes.
Hi guys, this is Michael Dolce inviting you to my 2016 Funk Fusion Masterclass Tour. To give you a brief rundown of what the night consists of, we get 10 players in a room in a really relaxed atmosphere, nothing too intimidating. We cover soloing over the one-chord vamp. I will be sharing all my concepts that have worked for me over the years and I still use to this very day. The idea is to show you guys these ideas and apply them to your own voice. If you feel that you know how to play a pentatonic scale and a major scale, that's all you really need. If you're interested in attending the class, you can book through my website at www.michaeldolcemusic.com. So look forward to chatting with you all and hopefully catch you at my next masterclass. Cheers for now, guys.
All right, thank you, Michael. And Michael is running a really great competition with some brilliant giveaways, including Mission Rewa pedal, an Evil Angel Trinity humbucking pickup, cool pickup, box of GHS strings, a silly guitar strap, heaps of cool stuff, some picks as well. For details on that, go to Michael Dolce Music on Facebook or look up our Facebook site, Guitar Speak Podcast, and you'll see a note kind of stuck to the top of our page, easy to find on how to enter that. Now that is only for Australian residents, and it wraps up in the first week of November, so check the posts for more details. Okay, on to my interview of the day. Randall Waller first made his mark on the thriving Aussie pub rock scene of the 1980s, both as the frontman of his band Avion and also as a sideman to some really big Australian acts such as Dragon, Jon English, Billy Thorpe, just to name a couple. Internationally, he worked with Bonnie Tyler in the late 1980s and was actually one of the first Western musicians to tour Russia as part of that gig. During the 1990s, Randall was a member of Shania Twain's touring band, which was just a massive gig. And Randall's got heaps of great stories about that, including working with Mutt Lange, one of the greatest rock producers of all time. Oh yeah, he's worked with Keith Urban too. There you go. Hey, these days Randall is at home back in Australia, back in Sydney, raising a family and working on his own stuff and still doing a bunch of really cool gigs as well. Alright, so this interview is broken into two parts. So here's part one of my interview with Mr. Randall Waller. Okay, Randall Waller, welcome to the Guitar Speak podcast.
Well, thank you. Good to be here.
Great, mate. Great to have you. Now, Randall, I want to talk about your career, which has been amazing. But very recently, if we just do something...
Incredibly lucky. Yeah. Yes.
You played at the Gary Moore Remembered gig.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
That was... look, the whole... It does fly a little close to the tribute thing, but it wasn't. I didn't feel like it was a tribute thing. Mm-hmm. It was sort of... it was just called Remembering Gary Moore, and I guess what's good about that is that I grew up listening to him through the 80s, and he was just really one of my heroes. And I think I felt like it was a good opportunity to make his music more widely known and stuff. Not only that, it's, I mean, you can have principles that, I don't do tribute things, which is not true. I have done tribute things, but, it's not something I look for.
Mm-hmm.
However, having said that, it's always fun to get together with that bunch of guys. Most of the time you don't get together with other guitar players because they're off, you're each off doing your separate band things.
Yeah, of course.
And so getting together with Mal Eastick, I met for the first time. Phil Emmanuel, who else was it? Chris Camzelis is always a great hang. I love him and I love his playing.
Yeah.
Dave Lezo, who's just one of my favourites ever. So, and it's just always a laugh. Steve Edmonds, it's just always a great laugh. And I do it for the hang as much as anything else.
Yeah, sure. Unreal. Yeah, it was a great gig. You did, so your two songs, you did a Thin Lizzy tune.
Yep.
With the harmonies and stuff, with Michael Katselis doing the other parts. That was super cool.
Yeah, it's good fun, that one. I like that one.
Yeah, nice. And you did Still Got the Blues, which is like the iconic blues era Gary Moore, hey?
Yeah, it was probably, I don't know, was that a wise choice or not? I don't know.
Oh, so it's great. The thing I loved about the night, I guess that you've touched on too, it wasn't a tribute per se, like a tribute act. Like no one was trying to ape Gary Moore note for note. Like you all brought your own thing to it, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah, true. Yeah, exactly. How did the Thin Lizzy thing come across? Was that all right?
Yeah, that was epic.
Yeah.
I was waiting for some harmonies at some stage. I knew they were coming up, so
good.
That was fun.
Well, I think it's important to tip the hat to Thin Lizzy because Gary Moore was a fairly prime mover in that band, sort of in and out, and played a fairly important part in his career, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. He had a couple of runs with those guys, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So for you, so that gig was awesome. Going back there, what got you started on guitar? What was the inspiration?
Oh, jeepers. Creedence was talking about this yesterday. Creedence Clearwater Revival was the first band that really lit me up.
Okay, yeah.
Cosmo's Factory and Grapevine, I think, was really the first thing that really opened my eyes to just guitar and rock music in general. I followed them intently. They only had one other album out after that, I think, one or two.
Mm-hmm.
They had Hey Hitchhiker. Hitchhiker, I think, was a single that was kind of heard it on radio here in Sydney, and it was like, wow, it's actually on the radio. I couldn't believe it. It was so exciting to hear it on tours. And but after that, I guess I started, 72, 73, I started getting into Deep Purple, and Ritchie Blackmore really just still, for me, would be the most exciting player that I've met. He's just eccentric and weird and has his own thing, and the sound is just the sound he generates out of a Stratocaster is nothing short of brutal, and I just love it. It's so aggressive and nasty and angry. I love it. Yeah, mighty. Yeah, love it. So listening to him playing the Burn album was a watershed one for me. Burn and Stormbringer, I guess, were big albums for me.
Cool.
They would be the main prime movers for me in terms of inspiration and back when I was beginning. Yeah.
Yep. Great. And do you have a musical family? Because I know your brothers play. Kenny on bass and Johnny on drums. Was the household? Was there like an atmosphere of learning?
Yeah, Mum and Dad were players. Dad played saxophone and flute, and Mum wrote songs and sang, and did a couple of little albums. Bless her heart, and she's a great woman. And we were brought up in church, and we were all very much imbued with church music and throughout our young years, and so without thinking too much about it, that's sort of where I ended up in the first part of my playing and the first records that I made.
Okay, yep.
I actually started sort of thinking myself, sort of thing. So, but my sisters also, I had two twin sisters. They often come in twins.
Yes.
Sadly, we lost one of them 3 years ago to a hereditary disease that also took my mum about 7 or 8 years ago. And so that was really tragic and very hard to handle at the time.
Sure.
But she was musical, and my other sister is also musical. So yeah, it somehow runs through us somewhere there.
Yeah, that's great. That's cool. And when did you start playing in bands? Did you have some garage bands or things going on?
Jeepers! Look, I did a bunch of recording before I ever sort of had a band. And once the recording was done, my first little sort of independent solo recording, I started, having requests for gigs and stuff, and so grew a band together around that as a result of the record, rather than the record being a natural outgrowth of the band, which it would normally be.
Yeah, sure.
So, not really garage bands, but after doing a couple of recordings, within Christian music, I suppose you'd call it, moved on and we formed Lionheart, which would become Avion, because we had to change the name because someone else was using it, and that was in '72, and we made a concerted effort to do a bunch of demos and shop them around. We were able to score a publishing deal pretty much straight away with a guy called Chris Gilby, who was aligned with MCA Publishing, and he helped us score the deal with RCA.
Okay, cool.
Record late in that year.
Yeah.
I guess recorded in November, the first Avion album, and it came out in maybe April the following year. Did okay, it was, quite often people will tell me that they feel like the band deserved to do better. I listen back on those records and I think, they're okay, they're okay. But I can see why they didn't set the world on fire. They were never going to do that. But I suppose on balance, you're thinking about other stuff that was on the radio at the time. You kind of think, well, geez, maybe ours was certainly as good as that, But I don't know. The whole radio airplay thing has seemed very fickle and a bit of a clique, a bit of a boys' club or something. Or you've got a record company, slipping them, holidays to Hawaii or something to make sure. Right. And we never had that sort of. We were never in the hip crowd with all that sort of stuff. So.
Sure. Yeah, all that pay to play and payola kind of radio stuff. Sure. So you did 2 records with Avion?
We did. We did a bunch of recording for a second album.
Yep.
In Jeepers, by the time that was 85.
Yep.
Out of which came 1 single.
Okay.
But yeah, really, that we needed production, mate. What we needed was a firm hand of a producer, and what I've come to understand after decades of doing this is that a producer, in terms of music and making records, as opposed to a producer in TV and film world, completely different tasks. Producer for a record needs to be, as far as I understand it, and as far as I'm concerned, is involved in every aspect of the making of that record from the ground up. And I'm talking about lyrics, melodies, arrangements of songs.
Okay.
Sometimes co-writing, but not necessarily. And then the recording, not the engineering. It's good to have someone else engineering that, but overseeing the engineering to such a degree where it's directed by the producer, where the producer might say the snare sounding too thin or whatever. What can you do about that?
Sure.
Using his ears, but then having the engineer bring what he can to that piece of the puzzle. So we needed somebody that was going to step in look at the songs and say, this is I like this idea here. This is good. This is strong. This bit's rubbish. Get rid of that. Get rid of that. The play out's too long, or it takes too long to get to the chorus. You know, all of these kinds of things. Or you need, you know, you need more to set the chorus apart. You know, so when you hit the chorus, everyone knows here's the chorus. You know, because they're aiming for, you know, you're aiming for bloody, you know, 10-year-old kind of maturity level in listening. You know?
Sure.
So we didn't have that, and we really needed that. And I listen back to the songs, and I think, jeepers, I would do them differently now, and, you know, it would be a lot better now. But, you know, I did what I could at the time. So we didn't have that for the second recording with RCA.
Okay,
and so a lot of that was really wasted time and a lot of wasted money. RCA ended up letting us go, and we were then signed by EMI, and they spent a lot of money on making a record that was the following year, and that record was produced by Peter Dawkins, who was a lovely fella, really good guy, engineered by someone who I won't even mention, but he decided that once I don't know, from the day that I walked in, he decided that I was some young know-it-all upstart who needed to be put in his place, and he was the man to do it. So it was a battle, you know, from start to finish.
Sure.
Incredibly frustrating, and we were up at 301 in Castle Road Street. For 6 weeks. I spent a lot of money on it, and I had 3 years of my life in that record, and it sounded, you know, by the end, I knew it was sounding bad, sounding ordinary, and it was really, really frustrating. So much so I ended up having to get the manager in and said, look, Randall's really not happy with this. What can be done about it? We need to re-record guitars on this or that or the other. And the rest of the band even thought I was losing my marbles, you know, which was, you know, that was pretty disturbing. And then when the record finally came out, well, it didn't come out when when we had a final mix, which they assured me, you know, the engineer assured me, once you hear it with all the, you know, effects on it and everything, it's going to be huge. Don't worry about it. Fine, yeah. It didn't. It sounded just as hideous as I knew it would, and the band even came to me one by one and said, "Gee, the record doesn't sound that good, does it?" You know, oh, really? So we were saved in that instance. The record company listened to it. They said, "There's not a single there." I wrote another single with Clive Shakespeare from Sherbet, who's just a great mate of mine and a real mentor back in those days. I love Clive. Only lost him a couple of years ago. And we wrote an extra song, he and I, that was called Celebration, as a single. And the record company loved that, and they thought, yep, that's good. That earned us the right to then to spend a little bit more money on retrieving the rest of the album and salvaging the rest of the album.
Oh, okay, wow.
2.5 days, during which we re-recorded drums on at least 2 tracks, re-recorded most of the guitars on the entire album, and mixed it.
Wow,
So
that's epic.
That's what White Noise is. The White Noise, our second record, is really a salvage job.
Okay, yep. I remember, the album. I remember Celebration. I remember jamming on it in a mate's garage, and we could sort of do the intro. I mean, we weren't playing it properly, but we could get through the intro with the guitar figure with the fifths and stuff. But we couldn't work out the rest of the chords, so that was it for us. What were you playing back then? Because you went on to do lots of sideman work as well. So what sort of gear were you lugging around then?
I was using a mongrel Stratocaster that I built, that had on that record it was, I think it had just a humbucker, a 59, Duncan 59 in the back.
Yep.
And it had an old 1959, a 1974 model 1959 Super Lead, Marshall Super Lead.
Cool, nice.
It's really strange because Paul Janelle had one. He was the other guitar player in the band, great guitar player.
Yep.
And we had lots of laughs with Paul. He already had a Super Lead. When he first bought his, I still had a JCM 800, a 2203, the old standard.
Oh, yeah, yep. Yep.
Which is a big noise. They make a big racket, those things, and a good noise, But there was something about the cleanness and the punch of the Super Lead that was just, pretty irresistible. So I found one in the trading post then, because there was no eBay, right? So
Of course, yeah, every Thursday.
Yeah, that's it, mate. Yeah. So you race down to the newsagent to get the trading post, and I found one down in Wollongong somewhere, and the guy said, "Yeah, I've got to sell it. It's too freaking loud. It's just too massive."
Yeah.
So I thought, well, yeah, that sounds good. So went down there and bought this thing, and I got it for like $500-600 because
Wow.
You couldn't sell them back then. They were just too loud and people didn't know what to do with them. There was no master volume, right? So you had to either put a pedal in front of it or just turn the thing up so that it shook the foundations, right? So they didn't quite know how to deal with them. So I bought that and took the back off it and looked at the serial number in it on the inside of the amp chassis, and Paul and my amps were consecutive serial numbers.
Oh, wow. No way.
Can you believe that? Seriously, they were consecutive numbers.
No way.
74. Yeah, maybe 73, 74. Yeah.
Oh, full on.
Around. Yeah, that's what I used on most of that album. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
And a mongrel, like I said, mongrel Strat that I'd put together, and probably with the Super Lead, I used the orange distortion pedal, which a tip I picked up from Kevin Borich.
Oh, okay.
He always used two 50-watt Super Leads with the orange DS1, the old orange
Boss DS1, yeah.
Jeepers, at one point I even put the pickup that he had in his Stratocaster in the back of mine. It was
really?
Casio, some hot rail, not a rail, but it was a really stinking hot single coil pickup that made noise like there was no tomorrow, mate. It was like Armageddon when you turned it up. It was just like that. But when you started playing, the actual signal did drown out the noise, and it made a hell of a racket. So that was. I think I might have had that in there for a little bit of that album as well.
Okay, cool.
That and the distortion pedal and the Super Lead. And
Nice.
I've heard on reasonably good authority that the Nirvana Teen Spirit was recorded with a Super Lead and a DS1.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Nice. Mate, I had a DS1 then as well. The classic orange box.
It's a great thing, as long as I couldn't run it into the JCM 800 with the master model. The master model couldn't do it. It was just because there was already so much gain in it.
Sure.
And it just sounded a tin, like a little mosquito. It sounded hideous.
Yeah, the plexi had taken a bit better.
Plex, mate. Oh, yeah, massive.
Very cool. All right, so after Avion, you ended up doing some pretty notable sideband work in Australia. What sort of gigs were you picking up?
Avion finished basically on the 12th of September in '87. We'd been doing, and that was I can't remember, it was a Thursday or Friday night. We'd done a whole week of opening for Dragon.
Mm-hmm.
And that night we were on the way back from Shell Harbour Workers Club, and there was a car accident, and our keyboard player, Evan Murray, who was just one of the sweetest guys on earth, was killed in that accident. So that was it was a watershed moment in my life, really, that night. And so each night, though, leading to that, up to that night, through that week, all the Dragon guys were in the wings watching us, because we'd been doing it for a long time by that point. It's September '87.
Yep.
We'd had it, 5 years of a lot of work, and like '82, '83, '84, we did minimum 200 shows.
Wow.
In each of those years, minimum. And so, plus a lot of recording, a lot of writing, and a lot of mistakes, and a lot of wasted recording, and trying to write songs, and, just learning what we were doing. The album had come out, White Noise had come out. It was a salvage job, but it sounded okay, sort of. It was okay. Peter Blyton was the saviour of that record, bless his heart. I love you for that, Pete. And we were playing those songs, and it was sounding as good as we were ever going to make it, and I'd done a lot of gigs and learned sort of how to use my voice better. And anyway, they were in the wings watching every night, sort of shaking their heads going, wow, check this out. They were blown away, and they were raving about it after each night. So after that accident that happened that night, Alan Mansfield was part of Dragon, of course, as he still is, I think, and his girl Sharon O'Neil had another album coming out, and so I ended up joining that band.
Oh,
and
okay.
took an album, I think it was called Physical Favors or something like that.
Yeah. Had
So
Maxine on it. I think that was her big hit, or one of her hits.
maybe that was the album before this one.
Oh, okay.
Maybe. I'm not sure, mate. Actually, yeah, good question. I might be wrong on that. Maybe you're right. Yeah, I'm not sure. So anyway, I did that, and then early in the following year, '88, I did a stint with Dragon, playing with Dragon, which was big fun, playing alongside Tommy Emmanuel, and intimidating and crushing and depressing, and because he's an absolute freak of nature, that guy.
Yeah, absolutely.
A freak and a force of nature. He's just unbelievable. So did that for a while, and then ended up going to do a gig in Bangkok because a guy called Steve White was managing, who well known in the industry, great fellow, good mate of mine still today, was managing Dragon, and he needed to put together a band to do a rock and roll rodeo show in Bangkok.
Okay.
So, yeah, weird, eh? And so the idea was kind of sound, and I won't bore you with the details, but basically the idea was, how motocross, motorcycles, dirt bikes, was brought into stadiums with Supercross, right? And and they do. That's developed into Nitro Circus and all these extreme sort of, doing the flips on motorcycles, ridiculous jumps, and all of that.
Cool.
Well, before that there was Supercross, which was racing on a circuit in a stadium, right? And they'd truck in tons and tons and tons of dirt into a stadium and run these races. So the idea was, with this thing, was it would be a rodeo in a stadium, like in the Sydney Entertainment Centre.
Cool.
Okay? So there would be a band playing, there'd be dancing girls, laser light show, the whole thing. The prototype for this show was to be in Bangkok.
Oh, okay.
Long story short, the local finances had tried to do it without using the promotional services of the local promoters.
Yep.
And they kind of were fairly wealthy and powerful people hooked into the government, and they made it virtually impossible for the show to go ahead. There were death threats and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
But leading up to that, it was in Bangkok. We'd done a theme song for it, a ridiculous film, really embarrassing film clip. It was being played on TV in Bangkok before we even arrived.
Nice.
And it was really embarrassing. And mate, we got there, and like a massive, tennis court size billboard in downtown Bangkok advertising Cowboys. And I would walk around, these shopping centres and stuff, and people would recognise me. It was like being a star for a day. It was
Wow.
just, yeah, really weird. They would recognise me from watching this Satellite Cowboys film clip, which I'd only seen once. Right, so it was really freaky and weird. But and in the end, we never did a show. The date for the first thing came and went, and they're like no show, and and our name ended up being Mud. The whole
wow.
Satellite Cowboys name was Mud, absolute Mud, because people had bought tickets and they weren't being refunded. It was a schmozzle. So everyone came home after 3 weeks, and me and my then wife went on to London, and we ended up staying there for 5 years, basically, for 4 years, 9 months.
Okay. Yeah.
And I ended up being guitar tech over there for Bonnie Tyler.
Oh yeah.
And her manager ended up managing me. We tried to get a record deal over there, and that whole thing. And I spent a lot of time there writing and recording, and without very much success at all, really.
Sure.
So, but ended up playing with Bonnie a fair bit. Toured. I ended up playing bass with her at one point in Moscow and Lithuania.
Wow.
And then whilst I was guitar teching at the same time.
Okay.
Yeah, which is pretty wacky.
How do you do the gig and tech at the same time?
Yeah, not really, no. But had a red hot go.
Yeah.
But I went to Greece and the Persian Gulf and with her, and Norway for 6 weeks. It was just it was surreal. It was fabulous.
And she must have been pretty huge back then. That was at her zenith.
Absolutely massive, yeah. And she had just released a record. Jeepers, what was it called? It was the one after Total Eclipse of the Heart and all that. And it was Desmond Childs produced it, wrote songs on it, and some great songs on it. Yeah. And she Simply the Best was on it. She recorded it long before Tina Turner.
Oh, really?
Did.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was a massive hit in Europe, particularly Scandinavia.
Okay.
Absolutely massive, number one up there. And she did Save Up All Your Tears, that I think Cher then recorded later. She did a song that Kiss recorded. What was that one? Anyway, yeah, it was tribute to Dave Aston, the manager, in the song choice, because 4 of them ended up going on and being hits for other bands, other people. For some reason, it didn't work for her record. I don't really know why. I wasn't sort of privy to the inner workings of all of that, but it just didn't seem to work. But we did some fun touring and stuff, and got Bonnie pretty well. She's a great woman and great laugh.
What was Russia like? Because in the late 80s, that's still pretty early in the time of Western bands coming.
Krasnost, yes, that's right. Yeah, she was pretty much the second. She was just shortly after Elton John went there. He was, I think, the first kind of Western artist to go over there.
Wow.
Mate, it was Soviet Russia, and it was dismal, dark, bleak, depressing, and as far as I understand it, it has completely changed now.
Yeah, right. Yep.
But it seemed to my sort of unlearned eyes that Gorbachev really didn't have much of a choice. I mean, people were kind of, satellite television was starting to come in, and cable television, and people were seeing that what they'd been told about the West, how people lived on the streets and they didn't have homes and everyone lived in poverty. They were seeing that just simply wasn't true, and they'd been led up the garden path and really ripped off.
Yeah, wow.
And it was becoming glaringly obvious. And of course, that house of cards completely fell down once that wall came down.
Yep.
In November 9th, 89.
89, yeah, in Germany.
It really, but it was eye-opening to me, and it was fascinating and exciting and mystical to be there at such a time.
Yeah,
and
wow.
cold because it was November, December,
Okay.
'88.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mate, so what next? What happens after then? So did you go back to the UK following those tours?
Yeah, was there for just constantly writing and trying recording and doing what work I could. It ended up coming back home. It just it hit a dead end there really.
Sure.
Mind you, my manager there, my Bonnie's manager, he said, he begged me not to come back to Australia. He said you're putting yourself behind a brick wall again,
Okay.
which is true. You really are. Um, because when I came back, it was 92, 93,
Yep.
the heyday of the 80s, pub rock thing was on the way out. Grunge was back in.
Yeah.
Grunge was in, and things were changing quite radically. Poker machines started to come in, and
Yeah.
I know coming back in, like by the time I came back '93, things were beginning to change in music in Australia.
Yeah.
And not for the best.
Well, for our listeners, Randall, we've got listeners around the world, and maybe not everyone knows, but as you said, in the 80s, you were doing 200 gigs a year.
That's right.
And that was everyone. That was like, if you had a half decent band, you could find work, and if you would work hard.
Yes, exactly.
By the early 90s, with poker machines in, clubs weren't booking bands as much. Lots of venues were shutting down. So
that's right.
Just to put a bit of context to that, so you came back to a very different scene over here.
Very different.
What did you do then as a working muso? How did you make things work for yourself?
Well, my wife had kind of left at that point, and so she'd gone back to London, and so I was back here in Australia in '93, and really that I found that sort of completely devastating, and so I didn't want to play or sing or really do any of that stuff.
Okay.
But I spent basically a lot of that time, 93, 94, 95, I spent in the studio.
Okay.
Employed by a friend of mine who ran a publishing company and did a lot of engineering and mixing work for him.
Yeah.
And capitalising on all that I'd learned sort of in the UK, doing my own demos and engineering all of that, writing.
Okay, cool.
Etc. So, and so I became an engineer for him, and I did a lot of work for him. And then I got a call from Jon English. So,
Okay. Yep.
I was also still doing a lot of vocal sessions for ads and jingles and stuff. JJ's Jeans, it's a warehouse.
Yeah.
You gotta love, live, whatever, all of that. So I did like dozens and hundreds of jingles.
Wow.
So
I remember the JJ's one very well.
Yeah. Exciting. So, a guy who did some of the programming for songs at one of the major studios that did those those jingles. He was a friend of Jon English, and Jon was looking for a guitar player, and
Okay.
Charlie threw my name in and ended up playing with him for 93 right through to 98. So,
Wow, cool.
which was great fun, and Jon's a great guy, and anyway, played with him and did touring on and off, and then also played with Billy Thorpe, which was a lot of fun as well.
Yeah, cool.
96, 97.
Okay. Yep.
And back with Jon, playing with Jon English in 97, I met my now wife.
Yeah, great.
And she was the chick singer in the band, and I was the guitar player. It was, very extremely stereotypical. And, she was all over me like a rash, and I just felt sorry for her, Maybe not. So that's where we met. And then early 98, my mate Andy Seashon, the bass player in the band with Billy Thorpe.
Oh, okay.
And Andy and I had a mutual admiration for what each other did. before this, but that was the first time we actually had a chance to work together.
Right.
So, come 97, early 97, was it 97? Yes, it was. He'd had a gutful of Australia and doing the same old, gigs and same runs around, the East Coast, and with really not that much to show for it.
Sure.
You could survive, you could make a living, but you really couldn't get ahead. You couldn't buy a property or anything like that. So he decided to head to New York. And long story short, he ended up, after a year of really tough graft and playing in up to 9 bands at a time,
Wow.
and a lot of the time playing for tips and just cold calling management companies and stuff like that. He did the hard yards, I tell you. He ended up, his audition for playing with Shania Twain was to do the Letterman show.
Okay.
And so he did that, and he's an extremely talented man, great singer, great bass player, and just a good guy to have around, and good looking and all, and like muscly as all hell. So
he's a unit. Yeah, I've seen him.
Unit, yeah, he is. So anyway, he had called me late in '97 when I was still playing with Jon, and I just met Susie here, and he said, "Look, we've got this, this guitar player that they've got at the moment in this Shania thing. I don't know if it's going to work out. Like, what are you doing with yourself at the moment? And so the conversation started. I ended up sending over demos and this and that, and Mutt Lang, who was Shania's husband at the time and producer extraordinaire. Anyone who knows his name will understand what that is. He's
absolutely. He'd done Back in Black. I mean, that's it all.
Black. For those about to rock.
Yeah.
High and Dry, Pyromania, Hysteria for Def Leppard.
Def Leppard stuff. Yeah.
4 Heartbeat City. Who's gonna drive you home? Yeah. Ryan Adams. Anything I do it for you. That Robin.
Wow.
Then Shania's stuff, the 3 and only 3 hits, 3 for 3 off the Cause in Blue album. He did. What else? He did tracks for Backstreet Boys, for Britney Spears. He's more recently produced the Dark Horse album, Nickelback. He's done Maroon 5 since then. And the latest Muse album called Drones. So,
really? He did that record too? Cool.
Yeah, he did. So he's just prolific, and no one comes close to the numbers that he can spout in terms of sales and stuff. It's just insane. So so he was choosing the band, and he said to Andy, "Yeah, look, I like what I'm hearing here, but we'd like to find someone local." Anyway. By the end, it came too close to the time where the first show was, which was the end of May in '98, and I got the call, and Andy had told me about this guy, George Travis, who was the tour director, and sure enough, George calls me, and he says, "Hey, is that Randall? This is George Travis," and I said, "Oh, I know who you are, George." Yeah, and anyway, so. He said, "Well, let me tell you a little about this little project we got going on here," and they hope that the tour might even go for 18 months. They said, "We're not sure how it's going to go because The Woman in Me had come out, the first album of Shania that Mutt produced, and it had done 14 million or so, and Coming Over had come out, and people were saying, well, it's not The Woman in Me. It's okay."
Yeah, right. Wow.
It's not. And so anyway, there was some, the experts, were sort of saying, "Oh no, this is nowhere near The Woman in Me," blah blah blah. So we weren't sure how it was going to go, and George wasn't sure. He said, so anyway, but that's the situation. He said, so it'd be great if you could, whatever you've sent over has tweaked Mutt's interest enough to have me call you and find out what's going on. So anyway, 10 minutes later, Mutt called me.
Wow.
And he wanted me to sing over the phone some parts just to make sure that I could reach them. That, they weren't out of my range and stuff. And harmony parts. A particular one that he wanted me to do was it's called "No One Needs to Know." Shania song from I think it's from The Woman in Me.
Okay.
And it's like, I'm not lonely anymore at night. And it's got a little yodel, kind of country yodel thing, where you got to break in a falsetto sort of thing. So, and he said, well, could I hear you do that, please, Randall? And so I sing it over the phone, and he goes, well, that's good. He says, all right now, but after that, it goes up a whole tone. It goes from C up to D. So you'd be required to sing a D. Is that going to be okay? And I said, yeah, mate, it'll be fine. I can reach an E if I need to at a pinch, He goes, oh, well, that's great. Could I hear it, please? Yeah, he wasn't going to let me. I'm like, it's not good enough to just say you can do it.
Yes, right? Yes.
I'm not lonely, So, and I did that, and he said, yeah, great. All right, I'm happy to go ahead with this, and I'm looking forward to meeting you. And,
wow.
I was shaking. I was literally shaking while I was talking. So George gets back on the phone 5 minutes later, and he says, well, look, if you can buy a ticket, I'll buy the receipt from you when you get here, and just come in on a tourist visa, and if it turns out that you're the guy, well, we'll fix up the visa here.
Wow.
And I said, okay. I said, but George, he says, yeah, what? I said, I'm the guy. And that's what he said. He goes, yeah. That's what the other 25 said. 25. That's what the other 25 said. They'd have 25 people.
Wow.
Seat. So that when I showed up, I introduced myself as Mr. X because they had already been rehearsing for 3 months. And I'm talking like 10-hour days, 10, 12 days. Not every week, but when they got together, like weeks and weeks and weeks of 14-hour, 12-hour days, minimum 12.
Wow.
So, and they would, as they were playing all of this stuff, there was 25 songs they were going to put in the show, and when they would say they'd come across a part and say, well, who's going to sing that bit, or who's going to play that guitar? But we need that guitar bit there, and they kind of look at each other and think, well, and point over to where I would stand.
Okay.
And say, well, Mr. X, who ends up being there, it's going to be Mr. X's job to do that, right? So I introduced myself as Mr. X, thinking, and basically saying, I said, no point in learning my name. I'll be gone tomorrow like the other 25, right? But I wasn't, and ended up hanging in there. And so my nickname for that whole tour and onwards, it was X. So
that's great.
And so I have an X on virtually all of my guitars.
I was going to ask why you've got that. Now I know.
That's where it comes from. So
that's cool, man.
So mate, that was very lucky, and I will forever. I never forget this. How grateful, my gratitude overflows to Andy Seashine for throwing my name in there. I don't know. I can never repay him for that because he put his neck on the block.
Yeah.
He's told Mutt, one of the probably the greatest rock and pop producer of our time.
Yeah.
You don't want to look like a fool in front of someone like that. And Andy put his neck on the block, and he said, "I've got the guy. He's in Australia. He can do this." And my gratitude will never end to Andy for that.
That's brilliant.
So we did that tour went through from May right through to the end of '99.
Yeah.
During which we did multiple, Europe and Grammys, American Music Awards, Billboard Music Awards, 2 American Country Music Awards.
Yeah.
Letterman, Leno, all of that stuff.
Because meanwhile, that album "Come On Over," which the experts weren't sure about, has become the biggest selling album by a female artist.
Isn't that crazy? So like I said, we started that tour in May, end of May, in '98, and there was a presentation for her on the top of the BMI building in Nashville in September.
Yeah.
We happened to be there. It was September 24th or 25th. We had a show there on September 25th in Nashville. I remember. I have a thing for dates. It's kooky. And so
I've noticed.
But we had a presentation for her by the record company to present her with a plaque for 2 songs that had received a million plays on radio.
Wow.
One of them was "Whose Bed Have Your Boots Been Under," and the other one, I think, was "Any Man of Mine." And 1 million plays. Crazy, huh?
Wow.
And Luke Lewis, the head of Mercury Records, her label, he got up and said, a lot of people are saying that this record doesn't have the legs that The Woman in Me has, and he put up a chart that compared the sales at that point.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, we were about 10 months into the release. I think it had been released late in '97.
Yeah. And
November '97, I think it was, November 19th, from memory. Anyway, it had, and "Come On Over" had outstripped "The Woman in Me" at that same stage by like 1 million copies, something like that. And at that point, it was at, I think it was like close to 3 million in September. And as we toured that continued touring throughout the following 15, 18 months, by the time we finished in the end of '99, we each had plaques given to us celebrating 17 million. And of course, it's gone on to be it must be close to 50 million now worldwide. It'd be up there with Back in Black. So Mutt has, he has 2 albums in the top 5 of all time.
That's nuts.
It's crazy. It's just mental. And I get emails from him every day telling me stupid jokes and stuff. It's awesome. It's great. Yeah.
That's cool. I've read that Mutt, so he does the production, but he was very hands-on, making sure the show was perfect. Is that true?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, everything. Absolutely everything.
Yeah.
Yes. I wish you could see my fingers here, but because the listeners aren't going to be able to see it. But one of the benchmark songs that they seem to find it difficult to turn the right stone to find someone to play, strangely, was "Man, I Feel Like a Woman."
Okay.
So it starts with that sort of shuffled figure, the guitar thing. So it was obvious to me listening to it that it was played with fingers. But once I got over there, I was playing like an A chord, capoed at the first fret. It's in B flat.
It's B flat, yeah.
Capo on the first fret.
Yeah.
And playing an A chord.
Yeah.
And I was playing the as it were, the A, E, A, the 1-5-1.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean.
Yeah.
With
for sure.
my thumb, I'm playing it with my thumb and 2 first fingers on my right hand.
Yeah.
Picking like that. And
which is sort of a Blackmore thing, isn't it?
Yeah, maybe
just going
it is.
back to that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. So, but sitting down once I arrived there and in rehearsal and sitting down with Mutt, he said, because he's South African but educated in the UK, and he said, Randall, actually it's just the 1 and the 5 there. If you can you not do the 1-5-1? And I said, oh, okay, yeah, right, okay. So I start with my thumb and first finger playing the 1 and 5, and he goes, actually, do you think you'd be able to play it with your first 2 fingers and not your thumb?
Really?
So I was kind of clawing at the 1 and the 5 with my index and middle finger on my right.
Wow.
If you can imagine that.
Yeah, that's weird.
Like a chook, right? Like a chicken, scratching in the dirt. It was weird. And he said, because the pad on your thumb is broader and it won't have the attack that your index finger will have, and so the one will be subdued by the 5, and it'll be a bit. It just won't be quite the right balance. I thought, okay, all right, okay. He said, now He said, "Now, will that mess up your singing? Will you be able to do that?" I said, it'll take. I'll just get used to it. That'll be fine. It'll be no problem. Okay, well, so I did that, and during rehearsal, that was like the first or second day.
Okay.
Fast forward to about 4 or 5 days in, the whole band's there. We're in their house, in his, in quotes, home studio, which is still the biggest studio that I've ever been in, ever. I'm not kidding. It was bigger than the massive room that the A Studio 301. You could fit the entirety of that floor of 301 into this studio.
Crazy. Wow. And whereabouts is this? Is this in Nashville?
It was upstate New York, up near Lake Placid.
Okay.
St. Regis Falls was the name of the town, actually.
Yeah.
So anyway, but it's a big compound out, massive property with a lake and a mountain, and it was just magnificent. So we're all in this studio, and I had a headache. I had information overload, and it was jet lag still, and just struggling to keep up. And I just wanted to give my brain a rest,
Yeah.
And it was like 4 PM. We've been playing all day. We've got another 4 hours to play. It was like, oh man, and so I reverted back to playing it with my thumb and first finger. Now, we've got our amps in isolation rooms where everything's mic'd up. We've got a massive monitoring setup. We've got in-ear monitors. Mutt's sitting down the front where the audience might sit, if you like, with a pair of monitors in front of him. He's learning French. He's got his French book beside him, sitting on a piano stool. And he's just eyes closed, and he's just moving his head side to side, listening to it. And I just wanted to give my head a rest. And so I slipped back to playing with thumb and first finger, and I'm watching him. And sure enough, he opens his eyes. No. He looks around. He sort of starts frowning, like, what's wrong? And he's looking around.
No way.
Each member looking like, what's going on here? Like, what? And he looks at me, and I kind of go, and I kind of like look, kind of that, give him one of those shocked kind of looks, kind of like, eek, busted kind of thing, and start playing it back with my first and second fingers again. Yeah. And he smiles and nods and holds up his first 2 fingers, and he goes, yep, holds up the first 2 fingers and then thumbs up. Yep, first 2 fingers, thumbs up. That's it, good boy. But he picked that out of 9 players playing, right? I wasn't, he picks that stuff out. He is somewhere else, that guy. I don't use the term lightly. He is a genius. He is a beautiful eccentric who is incredibly well read and will talk about any subject at length. And he's just an extraordinary man. And he and I became vehement dissidents of the Iraq War during the second tour, and we spent a lot of time talking together, many hours. Became political buddies on that, and it was at the beginning of the invasion and all of that, and we became that really cemented our relationship very much.
All right, there you go. That's part 1 of my interview with Randall Waller. Man, I love that Mutt Lange story about the fingers. That's awesome. Far out. Hey, good lesson too for all you guys in cover band land who actually play that tune. Now you know how to play it properly, and that's me included. I think I'll think of Randall every time I start that song now. Hey, so next week we continue on with our interview. We start with another Mutt Lange superhuman hearing story, which is very cool, and we dig into Randall's touring rig a bit more on those 2 massive tours that he did, plus a bunch of other stuff, and what Randall's doing now as well, which is really, really exciting. So make sure you tune in next week to the Guitar Speak podcast. The easiest way to do it is really just to subscribe to us on iTunes if you use some sort of iThingamajig, or Stitcher if you're on Android. Stitcher's great for Android users. I think you can use it for Apple as well. Or online at guitarspeakpodcast.libsyn.com. All of our episodes are there as well, and you can dig through any of them. We've got some good ones there. We're also on Facebook. We're on the Instagrams. You can see what we're up to there as well and join in the discussion. We love to hear from people who've listened into the episodes. Okay, thanks so much for joining me. It's a pleasure to bring these interviews to you, and I'm stoked to know people are actually listening to these things all around the place. So until next time, my name's Matt Wakeling. Thank you for listening to the Guitar Speak podcast. Bye now.